The courtroom fell silent, not because of the judge, but because Will Smith just walked in, unannounced, alone, and ready to expose the darkest secret Hollywood never wanted you to hear. What he said next didn't just shock the room. It sent tremors through an entire industry. But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below. Where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful, untold stories. Before the trial resumed that day, no one expected what was about to happen. The courtroom was already tense, the air thick with speculation, journalists whispering theories, and lawyers preparing for another routine witness. But then, without any formal announcement or media tip-off, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Will Smith walked in, alone. No security detail, no legal team, just the iconic actor, known for decades as the Fresh Prince, striding in with quiet determination. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the judge paused, visibly startled by his presence. There had been no scheduling, no rumors of his involvement, just silence. Until now, Will didn't speak at first. He walked directly to the witness stand, not making eye contact with anyone. Not even Diddy, who had been relaxed and confident at the defense table just moments earlier. The shift in energy was immediate. Diddy's smile vanished. He stiffened, his eyes locked on Will, but received no acknowledgement in return. When Will finally did speak, it wasn't with the polished tone of a movie star. It was raw, grounded, and deeply personal. "I wasn't asked to come here today. I asked if I could speak." The judge, after a brief pause, granted permission. And in that moment, the trial's entire trajectory changed. Will began by recounting how for years he had remained silent despite swirling rumors, leaked recordings, and tabloid headlines. Stories had circulated implicating high-profile celebrities in disturbing events, but Will's name was only ever mentioned in hushed tones, until now. He spoke of a party years ago, one of many in Hollywood, but this one was different. It was supposed to be a simple birthday celebration for Diddy, framed as a high-end networking event with celebrities and influencers, a typical night in the Hollywood elite. But the moment Will arrived, things felt wrong. It was a mansion in the hills, black SUVs lined up outside, security everywhere. My phone was taken at the door. They said it was for privacy, but it felt like something else, like they didn't want anything to leave. Inside, the atmosphere was surreal. Dim lighting, low music that pulsed in strange, almost hypnotic rhythms. No visible cameras, but mirrors lined the walls. It gave the eerie feeling of being watched from every angle. After some time mingling, Will said, Diddy approached him directly, welcoming him in a way that felt less like hospitality and more like a rite of passage. He said, "Now you're part of the family." But it wasn't a warm smile. It was possession. That night, he led me to a back room. What Will described next left the courtroom in stunned silence. He found himself in a room where explicit acts were being performed openly, not just by strangers but by people he recognized. Some were celebrities, others shockingly young, and watching it all, laughing like it was routine, was Diddy. I didn't know how to leave, and that was the point. Once you're in, you're in. The emotional toll of what Will saw that night, and the fear that followed, had been quietly eating away at him for years. He recounted how shortly after the party, a blocked number called him with a chilling message. "Hope you had fun, Fresh Prince." Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. On it, footage from that night. Will appeared drugged, sitting on a couch laughing at something he couldn't even remember. Behind the camera, Diddy's voice was unmistakable. "That's how we keep him." That phrase echoed in his mind for years. It was then, Will testified, that he realized what had truly happened. "I wasn't invited, I was initiated." The manipulation that followed was subtle but relentless. Invitations to more parties, declining them resulted in sudden losses. Movie deals fell through, long-standing collaborators stopped returning calls. Rumors began circulating online that Will was unstable, that he was hiding something, that he was difficult to work with. Diddy didn't have to say a word. The message was clear. Silence was the price of peace. And for years, Will paid it. As the courtroom sat frozen, Will continued, his tone steady, but his eyes betrayed years of buried trauma. His voice lowered slightly, his words deliberate, as if forcing himself to relive a story he had tried to forget. "You did this," he said, finally glancing at Diddy for the first time, not with anger, but with certainty. "You controlled me." He explained how it all began with a simple party invitation, a common ritual in Hollywood where connections are currency and appearances are everything. The invite came from a trusted contact, someone Will had worked with before. They said it was just a birthday party. Music, drinks, stars blowing off steam, nothing wild, just networking, and I'd been to events like that, so I didn't think twice. But once inside the mansion, Will said, the atmosphere shifted from luxurious to sinister. Phones confiscated, darkened rooms, mirrored walls, and low, trance-like music. The guests weren't mingling, they were observing, or performing. That night, Diddy personally welcomed Will into what he described not as a party but an initiation. A space where the rules of normal society no longer applied. He smiled and said, "Now you're part of the family," but it wasn't a welcome, it was a branding. Will followed him into a secluded back room, expecting a private conversation about future projects. What he found instead was horrifying. People engaged in explicit acts, some of whom were recognizable public figures, others looked disturbingly young. No one stopped it, no one seemed shocked. Except Will. They weren't hiding it, they wanted me to see. That was the real initiation, not being there, but witnessing it and staying quiet. He described feeling trapped, paralyzed by confusion and fear. And the moment he left that house, the real manipulation began. Within days, Will received a call from an unknown number. A chilling voice said only, "Hope you had fun, Fresh Prince." Then, silence. He tried to dismiss it as a tasteless prank, but a few days later, an unmarked envelope arrived at his office. Inside, a flash drive. What was on it devastated him. It was me, on a couch, slurring, laughing. I didn't even remember being like that. I didn't feel drunk that night. But watching the footage, it was clear. I'd been drugged. In the background of the video, Diddy's voice could be heard, saying, "That's how we keep him." Will stopped and swallowed hard before continuing. That's when it hit me. I wasn't a guest at that party, I was a target. From that moment on, he said, everything in his life felt rigged. The invitations kept coming, and when he declined, his career started to shift. Projects he had already signed on to suddenly evaporated. Collaborators ghosted him. Gossip blogs published invasive, fabricated stories, suggesting he was unstable, closeted, unfaithful. Diddy didn't need to threaten me, he didn't need to raise his voice. He had systems that did it for him. Producers, publicists, bloggers. He made calls, doors closed. Will cited a specific instance in 2013 where he had nearly closed a major international deal with a luxury fashion brand. We had a contract almost finalized. I'd already done the first photo shoot. Then, out of nowhere, the campaign dropped me. No explanation. 2 weeks later, I got another invite from Diddy. Will declined again, and the smear campaign resumed. Suddenly, tabloids ran stories about his personal life, each one disturbingly specific. The kind of detail only someone with real access could have leaked. It was psychological warfare. I started questioning my own reality. Was I imagining this? Was I paranoid? But then it kept happening, over and over. I wasn't crazy, I was cornered. He explained that this wasn't just a Diddy issue. It was a culture of silent compliance. A system where powerful gatekeepers could silence dissent without ever speaking a word. I knew other celebrities going through the same thing. Some are under contract so tight they can't even speak about what they saw. Others are just afraid of being dragged through the same mud. And then Will turned, this time directly to Diddy. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply said, "You didn't just collect people. You controlled them." The courtroom was stunned. Even Diddy looked shaken. Will said the deeper he looked, the clearer the pattern became. He attended a charity gala in 2016 where major names in music, film, and tech deferred to Diddy as if he held the keys to their futures. One executive from a streaming company handed him a flash drive and whispered, "Only you have the final cut." That's not networking, that's gatekeeping. The message was crystal clear. Diddy wasn't just a celebrity, he was a power broker. And those who crossed him disappeared. The courtroom remained utterly still. What Will Smith had already revealed was enough to rattle the foundations of the entertainment industry. But it was only the beginning. His voice now softer, more somber, he leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with the jury. I wasn't the only one. I know that now. Will said he had spoken privately with other celebrities who'd endured similar manipulation, some too afraid to come forward, others bound by contracts that made speaking the truth legally dangerous. Some of them are sitting silent right now. Some of them are sitting in this room. He turned toward Diddy once again, his voice firmer. You didn't just collect people, you controlled them. And everyone in that courtroom knew exactly what he meant. Will then peeled back the curtain on what he described as a vast web of influence, one that reached far beyond the music industry and into the very structure of Hollywood. He spoke of elite parties, charity events, and industry functions where powerful people across entertainment, politics, and technology deferred to Diddy with a strange reverence. At one event, I watched a top exec from a major streaming platform slip him a USB and whisper, "Only you have the final cut." He didn't know what was on the drive, but the message was clear. Diddy was the final gatekeeper. Will described how stars he once admired behaved differently around Diddy. Nervous laughter, exaggerated praise, desperate attempts to stay in his good graces. I realized they weren't his friends, they were his survivors. For years, Will said he stayed quiet out of fear. He convinced himself he was imagining things, that it hadn't really happened. But eventually, something changed. The turning point came when news broke that secret audio tapes were being played in court. At first, Will didn't think much of it, until he got a call, not from the press, not from prosecutors, but from someone he had once trusted. They said, "Will, you're on one of those tapes. They played it yesterday. People are talking." His stomach dropped. I didn't even know a tape like that existed, but once I accepted it might be real, everything else started clicking into place. He stayed up all night replaying memories. The party, the strange phone calls, the unmarked flash drive, the emotional fog that had hung over his life for 2 decades began to clear. It wasn't just fear that kept me quiet, it was humiliation. I realized if I didn't speak now, my silence would be my legacy. He thought of his kids, he thought of the headlines they would one day read. He knew he had to come forward. I called the prosecution myself. I told them, whatever you need, whatever questions you have, I'll answer them. He looked directly at the jury. I wasn't just coerced, I was played, I was filmed, and I was used. And then, in a moment that electrified the courtroom, Will turned to face Diddy, and you knew exactly what you were doing. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Will then reached into his pocket and paused, as though bracing himself. He pulled out something small, a photograph. This was me in 2004, right before the first party. He held it up for the court to see. It showed a young Will Smith smiling confidently, naive to the nightmare that was about to unfold. That man doesn't exist anymore. I haven't seen him in years. He turned back to the jury. This isn't just about one night, or just about me. It's about a culture built on silence, intimidation, and control, a system that needs to be torn down before it swallows someone else. Then, his voice sharpened as he looked at Diddy one last time. You said no one parties like Diddy, but no one lies like you either. Will returned to the witness stand, gathered his things, and left the courtroom without looking back. Diddy sat frozen, his face pale, his fingers twitching. He didn't speak. He didn't even blink. For the first time in decades, the narrator said, Diddy wasn't the one controlling the room. Outside the courtroom, Will didn't address the press. No victory speech. No public grandstanding. He simply walked out, head held high, shoulders heavy with the weight of 2 decades of trauma. When a reporter asked him later if he felt relief, his answer was hauntingly simple. Relief isn't the right word. It's just finished. As Will exited the courtroom that day, with his head high but visibly weighed down, the world outside was already catching fire. What had started as a single man's statement became something more, a reckoning, broadcast in real time. News outlets pushed out urgent updates the moment he spoke. Hashtags exploded across social media. #Will Speaks, Diddy Files, Fresh Prince No More, Hollywood Exposed. By the time the court bailiff could call a reset, Will's emotional testimony had already gone viral. Clips were dissected across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Influencers, legal analysts, and everyday viewers alike reacted with a mix of horror and vindication. And inside the entertainment industry? Panic. Absolute panic. PR firms activated crisis teams within hours. Internal emails began circulating in record time. Talent agencies held emergency meetings. Executives who once name-dropped Will for clout now issued sterile statements of concern and respect for due process. One insider at a major streaming platform told Variety anonymously, "Phones started ringing the second Will said gatekeeping." Everyone was scrambling. Not because they were surprised, but because they'd known. And now the public knew too. Hollywood's carefully curated silence was now a target. Meanwhile, the internet was digging. Fast. Old interviews resurfaced, especially ones where Will was asked about Diddy. Fans noticed subtle signs: a tense laugh, a sudden shift in posture, a carefully chosen phrase. Clips from Fresh Prince-era red carpets reemerged too, where Will would often smile a little too hard when Diddy's name came up. Now, those moments looked different. Too controlled, too forced. Fans didn't just sympathize, they were furious. Not just at Diddy, but at the system that let this go on for decades. Why did Will have to carry this alone for 20 years? Why were the whispers dismissed as conspiracy? Who else knew and stayed silent? But Will didn't hide. The next day, with no press conference, no interviews, and no publicist statement, he posted a single photo, black and white. A young Will Smith around 1993, standing on a film set. Sunlight on his face, eyes wide, smile easy. The caption read, "He didn't know what was coming, but he made it through. I'm proud of him." No hashtags, no explanation, just that. The internet erupted. The post was shared millions of times. The comment section filled with voices, fellow survivors, fans, public figures, therapists, and activists. Many men especially shared stories of abuse they had long kept buried. "If Will can speak, so can we. You gave us a voice. You didn't just tell your truth. You broke the silence for all of us." Back inside the courtroom, the fallout continued to unfold. Rumors began swirling that more subpoenas were being issued, not just to musicians, dancers, or assistants, but to label executives, streaming platform officials, and even tech and media conglomerate reps. Diddy's empire wasn't just under legal scrutiny, it was now being picked apart piece by piece. Some insiders whispered that more tapes existed. Not just audio, but video footage. Some allegedly featured other celebrities, public figures who might now be dragged into the light if those recordings leaked. The court moved quickly to seal the footage, but journalists, attorneys, and even Diddy's own team knew. If those files ever surfaced publicly, it would flip the entire industry upside down. And Will? He wasn't giving interviews. He wasn't showing up at parties. He wasn't doing press junkets. He was healing. Sources close to him told reporters he was spending time with his children, reconnecting with family, and, most importantly, not pretending anymore. "He's not acting right now," said one anonymous friend to Variety. "He's just being. And it's the first time in years he's been able to do that." Later that afternoon, before the court session ended, the judge did something rare. He addressed the room directly. What we heard today was not just testimony. It was a reckoning, and this court acknowledges the courage it took to deliver it. That final statement silenced the gallery. Not just because it came from the bench, but because it recognized something undeniable. Will's story was no longer just about him. It was about an entire culture of silence, one built by power and protected by fear. And in that moment, with the world watching, that culture began to crack. As the judge's words echoed through the courtroom, what we heard today was a reckoning. The weight of Will Smith's testimony fully settled over everyone present. No one moved. The jurors sat still, stunned. The gallery, a mix of press, spectators, and legal observers, looked like they'd just witnessed history, not drama. But the story was far from over. The final image from inside the courtroom that day wasn't of Will, or even of Diddy. It was of the jury, frozen, eyes wide, some red from tears, still processing what they had heard. And outside, Hollywood was already spiraling. Production meetings were suddenly postponed. Talent agencies issued frantic statements about internal reviews and support for transparency. Public relations firms sent emails to their celebrity clients, urging them to publicly distance themselves from Diddy if they hadn't already. But it wasn't just about Diddy anymore. The internet exploded with receipts. Footage of Diddy rubbing shoulders with political elites. Clips from award shows where celebrities were visibly tense when he was near. Old interview segments where stars like Kevin Hart, Meek Mill, or even Jay-Z looked off-camera mid-answer when asked about Diddy. Moments fans now believed were loaded with unsaid truths. And then, something even more revealing started to happen. Silence broke. Celebrities who had long been tight-lipped began sharing cryptic posts. Some removed old photos with Diddy. Some reposted Will's quote, "Sometimes the truth comes late, but it still hits like thunder." But behind the social media gestures was real fear. Crisis teams across LA and New York activated protocols usually reserved for political scandals. Studio heads were briefed, internal documents were scrubbed, lawyers fielded a flood of calls from past collaborators, assistants, and insiders, all asking the same thing. Is it safe to talk yet? What Will had done, in one testimony, cracked the dam. And as rumors of additional tapes swirled, not just audio but videos implicating other powerful figures, that dam threatened to burst wide open. Court documents revealed that a number of sealed exhibits contained footage, some showing acts that were not only exploitative, but potentially criminal. Legal experts said if even one of those files were leaked or introduced into the trial, it could lead to federal investigations, not just media scandal. But amid the storm, Will Smith did not speak again. He didn't need to. He had already said everything he needed to say, in court, on record, with clarity. He didn't return to work, he skipped premieres, he declined every request for interviews, but he wasn't hiding. He was living. Those closest to him said Will was rebuilding, not his career, but his sense of self. The man who had for years been smiling through something was now quietly reclaiming his identity. A friend told Deadline, "He's not trying to get back to normal. He's building something new. This was never about revenge. It was about freedom." And for survivors of abuse, especially male survivors, Will's testimony was a turning point. Support groups saw massive upticks in inquiries. Nonprofits for male victims of sexual exploitation reported surges in donations and outreach. One post, shared over 500,000 times, read, "He broke the mold. Men are survivors too. We're done being silent." Meanwhile, Diddy's team remained tight-lipped. His lawyers filed motions to discredit Will's testimony, claiming fabrication, attention-seeking, and bias. But public opinion was shifting too fast, too far. What used to be whispers were now mainstream headlines, and for the first time in decades, Diddy looked vulnerable. Not just legally, but publicly. His power had always been rooted in his influence, and influence only works when people are afraid. Will Smith had proven he wasn't afraid anymore. In the days that followed, the industry began looking at itself in the mirror. Other names began surfacing. Other victims began stepping forward. Some said they were waiting for Will to go first. And now that he had, the silence was over. Will Smith didn't win anything that day in court. Not a case, not a settlement, not a moment of cinematic triumph. What he won was something few people in his position ever reclaim: his voice. And when asked weeks later by a reporter at a charity event, one of the few he quietly attended, how he felt about the aftermath, Will offered a single sentence: "If truth costs everything, then it's still cheaper than silence." And that's where the story leaves us. Not with a Hollywood ending, but with a real one. A man spoke, the room listened, and the world, finally, started to change. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.